So we did our mailbag edition of the Morning Pit on Friday, as we always do. And, you know, as I've said before, I mean, I told you guys how we do this. We record these Morning Pits the night before. It's not like I get up at 4:30 in the morning and record a Morning Pit and then release it at 5 a.m. here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We record it the night before, and, you know, we're taking a bit of a risk. There's not going to be major news and things that, would demand our attention and reaction. But unfortunately, we had a little bit of a news overlap or news conflict, I guess, in terms of when it came out last week. You know, we had the Morning Pit mailbag on Friday. We taped that thing on Thursday afternoon, early Thursday evening, somewhere around there. And after the recording of that week's of that Morning Pit mailbag, news came out that Pitt basketball had landed a new recruit, not a transfer, but another high school recruit, the fourth in the recruiting class of 2025, another player joining the roster. And so we didn't get a chance to talk about that on Friday, but it's okay. You know, if it had come out like when we were doing the Morning Pit mailbag or maybe before, might have just given it a brief mention. Oh, by the way, this happened, and now let's get to the mailbag questions. Instead, we had some time over the weekend to really think about this and what the new commitment means, how he fits in with the roster, what it means for the roster, what the roster looks like going forward, and kind of what the next step is. So we'll get a little Pitt basketball talk here. Last week, we talked a lot of Pitt football. This week, at least to start, we're going to get into some Pitt basketball talk. In light of the newest commitment, what does Pitt's roster look like for the 2025-26 season? How does the new commitment fit in? What do they need? What do they still need? And did this new commitment address any of those needs? Got a lot of questions and maybe even some answers to a few of them here on today's Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a Monday edition of the Morning Pit here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, hanging out with you this morning. Hopefully you had a good weekend, enjoyed the nice, pleasant weather here in Pittsburgh. It got a little bit warm, but not too warm. But we're getting the week started with some scorching hot takes. Yeah, right. We never have hot takes here on the Morning Pit. We really don't get too strong in the opinions, I think, here on the Morning Pit. Maybe we should bring a little bit more fire to it. But either way, we just talk about the news and talk about what's going on and what's happening and give our thoughts on it and give our takes on it. And we'll get yours as well in the chat. You know, if you want to leave a comment on the video or preferably on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, where you can hang out with other Pitt fans and talk about Pitt sports. Panther-Lair.com is the website. You can see it below. We're on the 247 Sports Network. And that's a place where we have all our Pitt coverage. Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, everything, transfers, everything you could possibly need about Pitt sports. We've got it covered at Panther-Lair.com. We have message boards where you can interact with other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out, talking about Pitt sports on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we have Pitt video content. Monday through Friday, we have these morning Pitt videos. We have our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. I think we'll be back to Wednesday nights again this week. After moving it to Tuesday last week. It was a bit of a change that we had to make due to some scheduling stuff, but the way to make sure you don't miss any of our live shows or morning pits or anything like that, even when we change the schedule, is to subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you do that, you can turn on notifications. If you do that, you can get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live or post new content or anything like that at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and you will be locked in for all of our stuff. So the Pitt basketball recruiting news that came out on Thursday night, Macari Moore, the number 2 recruit in the state of Michigan for the 2025 recruiting class, a 6'3", 200-pound guard, committed to Pitt. And it entirely came out of nowhere. I mean, like, this one came so much and so far out of nowhere that it wasn't even like all of a sudden there was a report that he was visiting. Because I think he visited on Thursday before he committed. There wasn't even like a report about that. It wasn't even somebody got a report that he had committed. It came from a press release. Pitt basketball announced this. That's how far out of left field this thing came. Moore was previously committed to Iowa State, backed off of that commitment, and I think that's when Pitt seems to have gotten involved, took the visit, committed, and now is part of Pitt's 4-man recruiting class in the class of 2025. 25. Macari Moore, 6'3", 200-pound guard. Pitt's official press release had a quote from Jeff Capel where he describes Moore as a bit of a driver who can also make threes. His senior year of high school, Moore averaged 19.5 points per game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2.5 steals. And according to Pitt, he shot like 65% from the field and 47% from three. That's a big three-point shooting percentage. And you always, how is it going to translate? How does that, work in college? Does he still make shots at that kind of rate? I don't know. But boy, howdy, at some point in his career, he was knocking down threes. He showed an ability to make shots from deep. And that continues to be the thing I think we're all looking for. There's certain assumptions being made about the power forward spot, but the big need that's out there is a shooter. And, I'm at a point now where there's like two ways this can go, where they can find a transfer, a veteran shooter who can come in and be the team's main three-point threat and play 28 to 33 minutes per game and fire up threes and be the main guy who can knock down those shots. But failing that is really going to be about relying on Brandon Cummings, who shot 37% last year in limited minutes, limited opportunities, or Macari Moore, who's coming in as a true freshman. Noyes Indrusitis, maybe, as a guy who shot 35% in the U18 Eurobasket event last year. He shot 17 of 48 because he had a limited sample size at Iowa State where he shot 2 of 14 from three. But there's such limited options for three-point shooting on this team right now that if they don't go get a transfer, and maybe even if they do, like Macari Moore is going to have to come in and shoot threes. Brandon Cummings is going to have to be a primary three-point threat for this team. And there's a lot of time that they could still add someone. There has to be a good transfer out there who can shoot threes. Like, there has to be a guy out there. There's like 3,000 guys in the portal. Like, you have to be able to find one who can come in here and shoot threes. But in the meantime, they're loading up on freshmen. They've got 4 in this recruiting class. They've brought in 4 transfers. 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I wanted to double check my math. We know they're still working on potentially another freshman who could come in. But what they've added thus far, really with the exception of Moore, who is coming out of high school, what they've added thus far doesn't really do much to help this team's shooting, unless you're projecting Noyes Indrusitis to be a big-time shooter. And I'd be hard-pressed to say there's anything to base that on other than what he did before he got to Iowa State, which is kind of what you're doing with Macari Moore before he gets to Pitt. Now, unlike some of the other freshmen that they've added recently, Kieran Mullen and Henry Cody Lau, a couple of big guys, Lau being a 6'8", forward, I guess, and Mullen being a 7-foot center, where you're talking about those two guys probably coming in and redshirting. I would have to think Moore is a little bit more likely to play. Sorry for saying more there. And even though he said that Jeff Capel wants him in a point guard role, and that seems to be his maybe natural role, I think they're going to need him off the ball just to operate as a shooter. To run plays for him to get open to shoot. Again, unless they find that veteran transfer who can come in and shoot. And they've also brought in the guy who should be the starting point guard in DeMarco Minor, the transfer who came in from Oregon State. And so you don't necessarily need a point guard. I mean, maybe you could get a few minutes for Macari Moore at that spot. But Minor's going to be the point guard. What they really need, and what they're going to need from Cummings, they're going to need from Moore, and potentially Indrusitis, is three-point shooting. Because as I break this roster down right now, I think they've got effectively 3 guards. Now, some of these positions are a little bit nebulous, a little bit overlap. I think they've got 3 guards with Minor, Cummings, and Moore. I think they've got 3 wings, with Barry Dunning Jr. and Noyes Indrusitis and the freshman coming in, Amari Witherspoon. And then they've got a bunch of forward/centers and Omni Najai and Cam Corrin and Papa Amadou Kanti and Deshaun Jackson. And then you've got the two guys who are probably going to redshirt, and Henry Cody Lau and Kieran Mullen, as well as the two walk-ons who are coming back, Benjamin Mayhew and Juwan Nelson. You go down that lineup, and we can make a starting five, mostly. We could say DeMarco Minor's a starter. Maybe Brandon Cummings starts as the 2 guard. Maybe Barry Dunning Jr. is the 3. Deshaun Jackson is the 5. And as it's currently constructed, Cam Corrin, I guess, is the 4. Now, we're all waiting on Roman Siulepa, the Australian, who a whole lot is being put on his plate and his shoulders to come in and be the starting power forward for this team. Physically, he looks like he's probably capable of it. Is he ready to adjust to the American college basketball game and step in and play starter minutes? I don't know. And if he's not, or if he's, fine to come in and start, but maybe only ready to play 15 to 20 minutes per game, you're going to have to fill the rest of those minutes by either playing small with Barry Dunning Jr. or playing Cam Corrin at the 4. And I don't know. Well, I just can't really picture how that would look. Shooting wise, DeMarco Minor for his career is sub 30% from 3. Barry Dunning Jr. for his career is 30.1% from 3. Even Amari Witherspoon has not been a great 3-point shooter. When he was on the Under Armour circuit, he averaged about 6 attempts per game from 3 and shot less than 30%. The only guys with any kind of resume when it comes to being shooters are Cummings, Moore, and Indrusitis. And that's how the roster is constructed right now. Like those are the shooters. If they walked out and played a game tomorrow, those would be the guys you were counting on to make your threes. And Brandon Cummings shooting 37%, but on very limited numbers. Macari Moore coming in as a true freshman. Indrusitis coming in having shot 14 threes in college. So effectively, in terms of three-point shooting, he's effectively a freshman as well, in terms of his three-point shooting resume. Now, it could happen. Macari Moore could be a phenom as a freshman and make a bunch of shots. Indrusitis could take a big step forward as I guess he'll be a sophomore and make a bunch of threes and become a really good shooting wing that rotates with Dunning Jr. Or they play small a lot with Dunning Jr. and Indrusitis out there together. But this all feels pretty shaky to be counting on. In terms of the shooting. There's things about this roster that I like. There's things about the way they put this together that I like. I like the emphasis on toughness and physicality. DeMarco Minor is a tough guard. Deshaun Jackson, I was looking at the listed weights, right? I mean, like you have an image of in your head of Cam Corrin or Papa Amadou Conti. Those guys are both listed at 6'10", 235 on Pitt's official site. But I mean, you picture Cam Corrin, right? All right, so let's say Pitt calls him 6'10", 235. They list Deshaun Jackson at 6'11", 270. So you've got Cam Corrin an inch taller and another 35 pounds. And we know that these listed heights and weights are a little bit questionable sometimes, but 35 pounds heavier than Cam Corrin. I mean, like that's a big, physical, rugged player. If they bring in Roman Siulepa, again, more rugged, physical player. And I don't hate that. I don't know if you're going to have an identity, I would, my own personal preference would be your identity is a team that shoots lights out from 3 and averages, 82 points per game or something like that. But failing that, it's not the worst thing to have an identity of being a, tough, physical, drag you down to the muck kind of team. But even those teams need somebody to shoot at some point. And you'd like to think there'd be the urgency this year to find that guy out of the portal, that proven shooter, not rely on, Brandon Cummings will take a big step in his second year. Noise Indrusitis will take a big step in his second year. Macari Moore will be ready to, a guy who literally just popped up on the radar a week ago, will be ready to come in and play a major role as a shooter, as a true freshman. You'd like to have something other than that, something a little bit more stable, something a little bit more proven, something a little bit more reliable. But as it's currently constructed, Pitt doesn't have that. In terms of current construction, we're looking at Pitt having 14 roster spots accounted for, 12 scholarships and 2 walk-ons, just with all the guys they've brought in so far. high school transfers and then the returning players, both on scholarship and walk-on. I know the distinction matters less now, or will matter less once the House settlement is put through and roster limits are put in place, that it's not, the distinction of scholarship and walk-on doesn't matter quite as much. It's just a roster limit. And you could have, if the roster limit for a college basketball team is 15, you could have 15 scholarship players, you could have 15 walk-ons. Either way, you can't have more than that. And so when you look at what I just said, they're 14, and you say, well, but they need to get Roman Siulepa and they need to get a shooter. How are they going to do that? Well, it looks pretty likely that when the House settlement is approved and it all goes through, there'll be a grandfathering clause for returning players. And Pitt's got, as many as 6 potential grandfathers with Brandon Cummings, Amni Najai, Cam Corrin, Papa Amadou Conti, Benjamin Mayhew, and Juwan Nelson. And so those guys give you flexibility with the roster limits that you're not really bound by 15. You can push it. You can take more than 15. If you're at 14 right now and you need 2 more, you can do that. You've got the space to count one of those guys as an exception. And I have to think that the Pitt staff is recruiting on that assumption that those exceptions, those grandfather clauses, are going to be part of the House settlement and included in these roster limits, and that you can get away with it like that. Or else, because otherwise, I don't know why you would take 2 guys who you intend to redshirt, and develop. I mean, I like the idea. It's nice. You can keep a guy for a couple years and help him grow and develop into something. You like his tools and you feel like you can coach him up and all that stuff. That's a nice idea. But when you're dealing with a 15-man scholarship or 15-man roster limit, I should say, you don't necessarily have room for all of that when you have some pressing needs like the 4 and the 2. 2 of your starting jobs are still kind of, open and haven't really been addressed. Or at least you probably hope they haven't been addressed. And I don't mean, I think probably the last time we talked about this kind of stuff, somebody said, why do you just ignore Brandon Cummings as an option? And I don't mean to completely dismiss him, and I wouldn't entirely hate it if he ends up being the starting 2 guard for this team. I just think with the way they've built this team thus far, I think you would really like to have something a little more proven, someone a little more experienced, and someone with a little bit more of a resume to come in and play there. Not that Brandon Cummings can't play 25 minutes per night, and he probably should, for his development and for this team. But a legit transfer starting shooting guard would really, really go a long way. And then they do a lot of things quietly. Like I don't want to just sit here and say I don't see it happening. I don't see who they're. Maybe they're in touch. Maybe they're in touch with like the top 5 shooting guards that are left in the portal. We're trying to find that out. We're trying to track this stuff down, but it sure seems quiet. Now it was quiet, and Macari Moore slid right under the radar. So you can't rule anything out. You can't rule any possibilities out. But the way it's built right now, this team has a pretty desperate lack of shooting outside of 3 guys who don't have a ton of experience, and haven't really proven anything in Cummings, Moore, and Andrusaitis. So I like some of the moves they've made. They should be better defensively, I would think, this year. But they got to score. I don't know if they'll be better rebounding, but they got to score. You got to be able to put up points. And the addition of Macari Moore, I don't know if it was intended to be this, an addition where you say, this is the guy who's going to help us score. But right now he's looking like one of the best 3-point shooters on the team, at least based on his high school stats. So it's not a finished product. We have to keep telling ourselves that. We have to keep reminding ourselves of that. It's not a finished product. There are still more pieces that will be added, at least one, if not more. And so we'll keep waiting to see what they come up with. But for now, 14 roster spots accounted for, 12 scholarships, 2 walk-ons. 4 of those scholarships are freshman players, and at least maybe one more could get added to that mix to bring it to 5. And then we'll see. All right, I'm sure we'll have lots of things to talk about this week. Basketball front, football front, recruiting, transfers, all those things. We're moving through May, and we're actually starting. So this week is the first week of the 10-week countdown to the start of training camp. So we're starting our position-by-position weekly previews. We've done this in the past. Each day of the week will have a different focus. This week is going to be quarterback week, and each day of the week will have a different sort of focus and interesting conversation topic, because we are counting it down. If we do one position per week, there's 10 positions, and we got 10 weeks. So we're diving into it at Panther-Lair.com. So lots to talk about there. We'll be talking about it here on the Morning Pit. We'll be talking about it on Panther-Lair.com, of course, and on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for tuning in today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I hope you had a great weekend. Enjoy your Monday. Hope you get the week off to a great start, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.